But let's now go to the Sydney CBD and catch up with the Premier of the great state of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian. Thanks for joining us, Premier. You must be so relieved that New South Welshmen and New South Wales women, all of us, are allowed into Western Australia again.
Absolutely, Chris, and I've been calling for a long time to have the borders come down in all of our states. I think it's been all too long. I'm incredibly relieved, but I hope that all my colleagues, all the other state premiers and chief ministers, accept that you can't just keep shutting and opening borders willy-nilly. Businesses, families rely on that level of certainty. And I hope that people won't overreact, because we are going to get cases. We are going to have outbreaks. But if you have confidence in your system, you know you can get on top of it. You don't need to resort to those extreme measures. And I hope people appreciate that.
Look, I've said on this program for a long while that the way you've handled this has been the exemplar, and it's not like it's without problems. You had great difficulties and made your own mistakes, your own government with the Ruby Princess, of course, but learn with that. And you have been prepared to put up with a level of infection, those cases that come through hotel quarantine and the like, and control them without shutting borders, without closing down industries. And now you've been frustrated by the other premiers locking down and blocking borders. It's clear the Prime Minister has been frustrated too. Doesn't that show a problem with the Federation and an impotence about the National Cabinet?
Well, no, I think the benefits of the National Cabinet far outweigh the challenges we might have. But I think what it demonstrates is that the role between the states and the Commonwealth and the states amongst themselves is very interesting. And I don't think our modern federation has been tested in the way that it has of late. But I do want to see a greater level of cooperation. Yes, we're all residents of a state, but we're also Australians first and foremost. And we don't just think about our own internal economies, but the national economy. And there is strength in that. Our citizens are better off, have a better quality of life if our national economy is allowed to reach its full potential. And I certainly appreciate that in New South Wales. Whilst it's been incredibly frustrating, I hope that we've entered a new phase, a new era in dealing with the pandemic. And I'm not suggesting for a second that New South Wales won't continue to make mistakes or we're not going to have challenges. Of course we are. But that's the nature of a pandemic. And what you do is make sure you learn from those mistakes, that when you are in a period of lockdown, as we were back in March, that you use that opportunity to build up your systems and your resilience. And certainly I'm incredibly proud of the fact that even though we eased restrictions yesterday in a whole range of areas, we made sure that we've got that insurance in place, what we call QR codes. So every time you go into a hospitality venue in New South Wales, it's compulsory to electronically register you're there. So if there is an outbreak, if there is a challenge, we know that our health people can get on top of it as soon as possible. And that's really what building that resilience is about. It's not about looking at shutdowns as the first option. They should be the last option. What we've tried to achieve in New South Wales is making sure all these other things are our first options. We have a line of defence before you get to that horrible alternative of having to shut down economies or shut down borders. That's the last thing we want to see. I made a commitment to myself that we would never go into lockdown again. I'm not suggesting we never will. But we've really tried to build those systems in place, have confidence in our system to make sure that that is the last option, not the first option. And I just ask my colleagues in other states and territories to consider that as well.
What you say makes so much sense, but what's the point of having a national cabinet unless you all walk away from there, 6 premiers, 2 chief ministers and a prime minister, all agreeing to apply those same principles? Because that hasn't happened. Your colleagues, the other premiers, have been lockdown fetishists and they've been hardliners on the borders.
Well, look, Chris, there's no doubt that you're going to get a variation and difference in management and style with the different premiers in the different states, but that's no reason to abandon the National Cabinet process. I think the National Cabinet process has been useful because...
Sorry, can I just jump in? So could I just jump in? Because I'm suggesting something entirely different, really, not abandoning the National Cabinet, but giving it some muscle, making sure that decisions taken there are actually applied by all of the premiers.
Well, look, I'd love to see that happen, but of course a condition of that is having full agreement on every issue, and it's very rare that you will get every single jurisdiction agreeing on the same thing at the same time. And that's why I'm a firm believer that the Federation can also involve strong bilateral relations. When the other states haven't moved as quickly as New South Wales, I've just been able to contact the PM and say, let's you and I have agreement on this, and he's agreed in large part, which has been fantastic. So I think that modern federations should have room for stronger bilateral relations. I don't want to be held back by other states if we're ready to move forward in a particular way, and I'm sure other states in different areas have the same feeling. So I think there's an argument that says, yes, we should all be on the same page for certain things, and I think borders is one particular issue, and you're completely right on that. But there may be other opportunities whereby we say, well, look, New South Wales and the feds have an agreement and we're going to go it alone. Or other states might choose to do that as well. And I think it's really coming to terms with the modern federation. When the federation first happened in 1901, the states had similar economies, similar populations. We are very diverse now. You can't compare New South Wales, with all due respect to the ACT, or in fact to other smaller states. We're a very diverse global economy, reliant on different service sector. And to be fair, we've been smashed the most because of the lack of international travel. Sydney is the global city, and we've had to compensate for that through other means, which is why I've been really pushing hard to make sure we have open borders, that our people don't suffer, but also that we have that business flexibility as well across the borders.
When it comes to the economic impact of this, debt is topping over $100 billion in the out years for New South Wales, and you've had your AAA credit rating downgraded. How damaging is this? How worried are you about the future performance of not just New South Wales, but the whole country?
Well, Chris, I'm not that worried about New South Wales. I'll tell you why. Moody's reiterated their AAA credit rating, so we've got AAA with Moody's. And with S&P, they downgraded Victoria 2 notches, but only 1 notch for New South Wales. So I'm convinced we'll recover. We actually have a pathway of getting back into the black. The other states don't. And if you look at our debt burden versus our gross state product, it's actually still in a very healthy position. And what those figures don't show is that we've already announced 2 more things we're looking at regarding asset recycling, and they're not included in the figures. So the rest of WestConnex, and we're looking at lotteries, and there have been announcements we made as part of our budget process. So I'm extremely confident about our economic outlook. And I nearly fell off my chair when I saw the unemployment figures recently. We've bounced back in New South Wales in a way in which I hadn't anticipated. I've been pleasantly surprised, and that's been a great team effort by the community here in New South Wales, not just government, but business and the community organisations that have worked together to try and keep our economy as open as possible. And New South Wales citizens are starting to reap those benefits. So, yes, this is a bump in the road, but when you invest $29 billion in stimulus, you didn't anticipate you were investing, you're going to have some kind of consequence to that. And the consequence we're experiencing in New South Wales is very marginal. It's eminently recoverable, and we have a pathway to that recovery. So I'm concerned, but not at all worried about the medium to long-term outlook. I'm actually feeling very positive. I think come 2021, late 21 and early 22, there'll be a lot of pent-up demand to invest in New South Wales, to carry business in New South Wales, and our policies certainly will support our citizens in having a good quality of life, but also businesses not only surviving the pandemic, but also thriving. A number of businesses are doing very well. But what government is here for is to provide a helping hand to those that might be struggling through no fault of their own. And that's exactly where our policies are targeted here in New South Wales.
You've got another breakout issue in your own coalition around law and order. Is your government looking at liberalising drug laws?
No, we're not, Chris. What we are looking to do is firstly maintain our tough stance on drugs, and I can't stress that hard enough. In fact, last summer, I spent all summer defending my position on not supporting pill testing at music festivals. So our government's record on drugs is a tough one, and it should be. But if there are opportunities for us, especially where children are concerned, to provide additional resources to get people into rehab and to stop the cycle of despair, especially with ice, which is a huge addiction problem, especially in our regions. I mean, it's a problem which we can't ignore. So we're looking at opportunities we have to put more resources into rehab and medical services, in addition to maintaining our tough stance. And I think we'll continue to find that healthy balance in New South Wales. But
well, there was obviously some sort of dissent and disagreement in your cabinet. Some of it was leaked, and even your deputy premier, the Nationals leader, John Barilaro, felt he had to say this on radio.
I can promise you this, we're not going soft on crime. We'll continue to make sure when it comes to drug dealers in this state, that they get the maximum penalty thrown at them. And, you know, I know what that looks like. And then the last thing I would want to see is a softening on anything to do with drugs in this state.
So you're saying you agree with John Barilaro? Why were so many in your cabinet concerned then?
Well, of course I agree. And in fact, I've said that consistently during my time as the Premier. We don't take a soft stance, quite the opposite. And I don't ever intend to. But can we invest more in rehab? Absolutely. Do we want people, especially families? I mean, the number of parents who approach members of parliament and other community leaders about their family experience with their children is shocking. Can we provide better services to support families who are going through addiction? Absolutely we can. And they're conversations we should have. But they're conversations a strong government should have amongst its ranks. These are healthy conversations to have, because if you keep doing the same thing, you're not going to get a different result. So you can still maintain your tough stance on drugs, but make sure you're also providing those alternate services, those opportunities for people to go to the rehab, to get the support they need to get rid of their addiction, because people who are addicted to substance cannot function normally, cannot have a good life. And that's the last thing we want to see. Not only is it bad for them, but everybody in and around them. And that leads to further crime and leads to further social disrepair. And that's the last thing any of us want to see. We don't want to see communities destroyed by addiction and the scourge of drugs, especially ice. And that's why we asked for the Commission of Inquiry in the first place. The recommendations are there. We've already ruled out a number of controversial recommendations, and we're looking forward at some stage to give our response to the rest of the recommendations. But I don't think anybody would begrudge us for saying to our citizens, we want to reduce addiction, we want to break the cycle of despair, and we want to give parents in particular hope about their children into the future.
Premier, I think the surprising controversy of the year was the revelations about your relationship with former Liberal MP Daryl Maguire, even after he left Parliament under a corruption cloud. Now, we'll wait and see what ICAC says about all that. But do you believe you owe the people of New South Wales an apology either for keeping that relationship secret or continuing it up until even beyond the point that he left Parliament under that cloud?
Well, Chris, I've expressed my feedback on that issue in a very open, direct and transparent way, and I don't think anybody can deny that. I've been very direct with the people of New South Wales, and I just want to use this opportunity to thank the community for their support. I've been overwhelmed by it. It has been a difficult time, but what I will never ever do is distract myself from the job that I've been elected to do. That's what inspires me every day of the week. And I hope the people of New South Wales feel they've been well served by their government, because nothing is more important to me than looking after the welfare of our 8 million citizens. I will never, ever lose focus of that. And that's what I intend to continue to do. I
understand that, but do you think you owe the voters an apology for not being as forthcoming about all of that as perhaps you might have been?
Well, I think at the end of the day, people appreciate the circumstances I was in. They appreciate my directness and my openness and my honesty about the situation, and also the fact about how committed I am to my job. And I've been overwhelmed as I visited the length and breadth of the state by the feedback I've received from people on that issue. And I think people appreciate first and foremost that I'm here to serve them, the community. And people also distinguish between private life and what happens in your public life. And I want to thank people for their understanding.
So to be clear, you have nothing to apologise for?
Well, I've been very honest and direct, and I've done nothing wrong, and the people of New South Wales appreciate that. And I remain committed to keeping the public, the people that I'm elected to serve, my number one focus and priority. That gives me a great source of inspiration to be able to do that every day. And I hope that people, our citizens, feel well served by my government's efforts, not just during the pandemic, but also on a whole range of other issues.
Gladys Berejiklian, thanks so much for joining us. I hope you have a terrific Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Chris. It's always good to chat. Thank you very much.
Gladys Berejiklian there, the Premier of New South Wales. As I keep saying, she has hands down managed this pandemic better than any other Premier in this country. They all ought to look to how New South Wales has, yes, made mistakes, but learned from them and tried to keep the community functioning and the economy and the borders open.